Hello everyone, Lance here, going to bring you a Bible lesson tonight for our Wednesday night Bible study. Been a little while since we've had one of these video lessons, and I do apologize for that. Just some things have interfered with that as far as health and other travel situations, so I appreciate your patience and have been missing out on this. But looking forward to opening the scriptures together again, and I'd invite you to open your Bible to Genesis chapter 19, and that's where we're going to pick up with our lesson at this point. Previously, we looked at Genesis 18, where Abraham, in particular, intercedes for the city of Sodom. And he talks to God, talks to the men that have appeared to him. It appears to be God's messengers that are appearing to him, and asks the Lord, as it's termed here, he asked the Lord if he would spare Sodom if he found a certain number of righteous people in the city. And he worked his way all the way down to 10. If as little as 10 righteous ones could be found, would the Lord spare the city. And so the Lord had stated in verse 32 of Genesis 18, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And then we read in verse 33, so the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. And so this is where it's left, at least there in chapter 18. And we're going to go right into chapter 19 now with the story of what ends up happening at Sodom. But I wanted to mention here that I don't know that this was mentioned last time in this lesson, but that number of 10 may have been a number that was given for a reason by Abraham. That may have been the number he wanted to get down to, because when we take a look at who Abraham knew was in the region of Sodom, he knew that Lot and his wife were there with their family. And so if you looked at the fact that Lot was there with his wife, that's 2, and then 2 unmarried daughters that we'll soon read about, that would be 4. And then he had married daughters and their husbands, and that would be at least 8 now. And we're getting to the point of there being 8 or 10 or more just in Lot's family, his immediate family. As you see, the married daughters and their husbands and their sons, really getting it to where you would logically say that should be a minimum of 10 people, regardless of if there were any other offspring, additional sons or daughters. And then also, regardless of how many are in Lot's household that are servants, maidservants, herdsmen, etc. Because remember, when Abraham and Lot decided where they were going to go, which direction they were going to go, back just a little while before this in Genesis 13, the discussion showed us that they had many servants and herdsmen with their flocks, and they were clashing over where they would water their flocks and so forth, and their herds. So, just something to note that, Abraham, as he worked through this series of numbers with the Lord, it very well could be that Abraham was trying to get to a certain number because of these, of his family, if you will, that he would have known was there. So let's read Genesis chapter 19. I'm going to read the first 11 verses, and we'll see kind of how far we go in this lesson. We're not going to make it too lengthy. There are 38 verses in Genesis 19, and quite a bit to cover here. The first 29 verses really deal with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we're going to work our way probably through all of that if we can without spending too much time. But I want to begin with the first 11 verses. It says, Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned in to him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them carnally." So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." And they said, "Stand back." Then they said, "This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. A lot of things take place here just in the first 11 verses. One thing to note right away is in verse 1 we see that the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. Back in chapter 18 we had 3 men that had come to Abraham. And now at this point we're down to 2, and it specifically says 2 angels that have come to Sodom in the evening. If you go back to chapter 18, one of the angels here, or one of the men, is referred to as Jehovah, is referred to as Lord in all caps, as you may read it in your translation. And it changes in chapter 19, where you just have 2 out of these 3 angels, if you will, 3 messengers. Only 2 of them go to Sodom. And so it brings up some questions, and commentators have talked about whether or not one of the angels was the Lord himself, God coming in the flesh, or in the appearance of the flesh here at this time, to speak to Abraham. And what's the change exactly in chapter 19? I don't know that I really have the answer to that. I don't know that we're going to for sure be able to get to it in what we are given here in the text. But it is worth noting that very clearly we have 3 in chapter 18, and now we have 2 in chapter 19. We do have the term Lord or Jehovah, Yahweh, used in chapter 18, and that's not the way that it starts here in chapter 19. So in this, these angels come to the city, and Lot is at the gate, and he rises to meet them, and he bows his face to the ground. And so, again, something we're not told in the text is, why is Lot interested in these men, and how does he know that they are angels? What's the deal here? We're not told that, but it looks like, as we read the text, that Lot understands that there's something special about these angels, these men that have come here. And even in that, he even makes the statement down in verse 8 that these men, this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. So it's like Lot has either been made aware as soon as they came, or in the process of this evening, or maybe beforehand, but Lot has been made aware that they have come because of the wickedness in Sodom and Gomorrah. So they come here, and they at first say they're just going to stay in the town square. And Lot insists, no, don't do that. And knowing the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah, and if you're not familiar with the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah, what is ultimately the total wickedness and depravity of Sodom and Gomorrah is homosexuality. And thus, even to this day, the term sodomy comes and originates from this history at Sodom. And that's exactly what these men of the city come to do. Once they find out that there are these visiting men in the house of Lot, they come to the door, and the outer door of the home, and they are insisting that these men be brought out to them, and they make no bones about it. They say exactly what they want to do in verse 5, bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. And that's a dressed up way of saying that they could do sexual things with them. And this would be men with men doing what is condemned by God. And this is, again, the ultimate depravity, the ultimate evil and wickedness, immorality of Sodom and Gomorrah on display right here with what happens at Lot's house. And so Lot is able to get these angels to come and to stay at his house instead of in the open square. And the men of the city, and notice it says in verse 4, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. This was a prevalent thing. This was not something that was kept quiet. It was not something that maybe only a select few were involved in, which then harkens back to what we know happened in chapter 18 when Abraham, is like, if there's 50 that are righteous, if there's 40, and all the way down to 10, if there's just at least a few righteous people in this place, will you spare it? And ultimately, what we're seeing is that there's no righteousness here. There's an ultimate depravity in Sodom and Gomorrah. Young and old. That's something for us to even think about today, because what we will also see in our culture, and has been seen throughout mankind's history, is that the things that we tolerate, the things that we accept, in some way, form, or fashion also become the things that we promote and the things that we allow. And it is not just things that are done by adults, but it then infiltrates our younger generation. And before you know it, it is accepted as very commonplace in our society. I would submit to you that it doesn't take a whole lot of examination of America in particular to see that this has happened in our culture in the United States. And just over the last 50 to 75 years, there's been quite a change in the morality, the ethics, the standards, the expectations of mankind in general, and especially what is socially acceptable, what is acceptable with a family, what is acceptable sexually, what is acceptable both young and old, as it's termed here in Genesis 19. And so we see an example here, a very bad example, in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, where the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded this house of Lot's, and they are there not to do something good. They are there to do something wicked. It's sad when you think about it that way. And I would encourage us to think about what's happening in our world, in our culture today, and be sure that we're striving to be shining lights of God's morality, of God's standard, of the goodness of God, the greatness of God, the wisdom of His Word, and that we are doing our best to uphold the morals and the standards, the expectations, the teaching and instruction and encouragement that we find from God. And we're to let all that we do be done in love, no doubt, but we also must be willing to take a stand for what's right. We also must be willing to speak out against what's wrong. And we can do that with grace, seasoned with salt, as the New Testament teaches, with every ounce of love that we can. Sin, though, is sin, and that's whether it's the sin of homosexuality or the sin of fornication, sexual relations outside of marriage. And even here in this instance, as we go on through these first 11 verses, Lot goes out to these men and he pleads with them, and he doesn't just plead with them to stop and not do what they're about to do, but he pleads with them and even says that he would send out his unmarried daughters, his virgin daughters, that he would send them out and let them do with them as they wished. And so in essence, Lot is saying here, I'll send my daughters out that you can commit a lesser sin than the sin of homosexuality in his mind, to keep them from doing this with these two visitors that have come. Now that wasn't right of Lot to do that. We might even say in our kind of way of saying things that, two wrongs don't make a right. And in this case, it wouldn't be the case for Lot that he could make it right by doing what he proposed here to do. But this is how desperate this is. This is how frustrated Lot is with what's going on, that he would go to the point of even neglecting the well-being of his daughters to try to stop the wickedness at the level that it was being done. Certainly not right for him to do that. Don't misunderstand me. It was definitely not right for him to do that. It's not an excuse for that. He failed to protect his family, which a father should do, in protecting his children and their morality and their spirituality. And he was failing to do that in an effort to try to save these guests. And the effort to try to save the guests is noble, and that is right, but not at the expense of his own children. Not that either one was going to be good. Lot was in a tough place. And you and I may be in tough moral decision-making places in our lives. And so this is a lesson for us to really think, well, what would we do, and what are the other ways to try to handle this and deal with this? Ultimately, Lot is saved from this moment because the two visitors pull Lot into the house and shut the door. And not only do they do that, but they strike the men who are at the doorway with blindness so that they can't even really find the door anymore. They were growing weary in trying to find the door. And so the angels help out Lot in this situation. Well, again, there's much we can learn, just from this. I want to read verses 12 through 29 so that we get the rest of the story. Okay, so Genesis 19, now beginning in verse 12. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city." But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they brought them outside, that he said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." Then Lot said to them, "Please no, my lords. Indeed, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown to me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live." And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. So verses 12 through 29 here of chapter 19 tell the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They warn Lot, these angels, that the Lord is going to destroy it and that they've got to get out of there. It's sad to see that Lot not only lingers himself, but that he's not listened to by his sons-in-law. They seem to think he's joking, and so they don't seem to be listening. It's also sad, as I mentioned, to see that Lot even lingers and that he doesn't hurry to get out of there. And then it's ultimately sad to see in verse 26 that Lot's wife looks back, as they were told not to do, and she looks back and she's turned into a pillar of salt. So really sad and obviously destructive time for Sodom and Gomorrah, and even for Lot and his family. He's going to lose members of his family in this. But Lot is spared. And in this, we're told that God remembers Abraham and that Lot is spared. Well, there's a number of lessons that we can learn even from this text, and then some of the things that take place after this. But for today, we're going to stop here, looking at Genesis 19, the first 29 verses. Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. We see that Sodom is truly a wicked place by the way that things unfolded the night that the two angels come to Lot. We also see that Lot is a very, very fortunate person, that he has the opportunity to get out of this place, but there's consequences that take place, and Lot is going to lose not only his place to live at the time, but he's going to lose family members even in this destruction. So, a couple of just immediate lessons for us. Is God serious when he talks about wickedness? Yes, he is. Sodom and Gomorrah will forever stand as an example where we can see that when God says that something is immoral, that something is wrong, that something is unacceptable, we need to believe him. And we need to believe him to the point that we will do anything to change it. We also need to understand the reality that sometimes when wickedness and evil is around, the best thing we can do is get away from it. In 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 33, we're told not to be deceived, that evil company, evil companions corrupt good morals. Basically, that just means that the ones that we hang around are going to have an influence on us. And so if we're in the midst of wickedness and evil, then no doubt that wickedness and evil can rub off and will rub off on us. I would submit we can even see that here in the example of Lot, in that he was even willing to send out his 2 daughters to these men. That seems to indicate that Lot wasn't thinking clearly about morals and God's standards of righteousness. And so maybe we need to wake up and we need to re-examine what God has said is right and is holy and is good. And we need to be accepting of what God has said is wrong and wicked and evil. We need to be sure that we are on the Lord's side in all of those things. And that with as much love as we can muster up, we are trying to let our lights shine, share the truth with others, and encourage others to also be on the Lord's side and not against him in any way. Will you pray with me? Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much that we can open your word and study from it. We pray, Father, we may learn the lessons that are in it, and especially even right now, the lesson that we have seen in Sodom and Gomorrah, how that this wickedness was unacceptable, ultimately punished by you, that warnings were given, and so we need to see the warnings of the Scriptures in our lives as well. Make the changes that we can make to be on your side and not be found to be fighting against you. Father, I pray especially tonight for those that are struggling in sin. Maybe they feel trapped by it. Maybe they feel overwhelmed. Maybe they feel entangled to the degree that they don't know that they can get out. Maybe some of those things were happening even in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe it's happening even in our world today. And I just pray, Father, that you will show them that no temptation is so much that they cannot overcome it. That there's always a way of escape as you've promised us in the Scriptures. Help them look for that way out. Help us be shining lights all around them. Help us to help one another with love and fear, to strive to serve you acceptably, and to be found on your side. We're so thankful for Jesus, for his love and his sacrifice, for the hope of heaven that we have because of him. It's in his name that we humbly pray. Amen.